Welcome to CMMS Radio, a podcast and general resource for all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, from selection to implementation to help you make better choices and have a successful CMMS journey. We'll bring in experts along the way to help us learn more about CMMS, facilities operations, and much more. If you need help with the CMMS project, send a message at CMMSradio.com using the What's on Your Mind link. Suggest a topic, share your CMMS story, or ask questions. The Reliable Plant and Machinery Lubrication Conference and Exhibition is happening June 3rd through June 6th, 2024 in Chicago, Illinois. Secure your 10% discount by visiting conference.reliableplant.com. Click on Register Now and input the code CMMS. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. We've got a very special guest, another expert guest, a bona fide expert today on CMMS Radio. We're going to get into a lot of different things. One thing that's coming up for everybody to know is we've got Reliable Plant Conference happening in Chicago. That's going to be in June 3rd through the 6th in Chicago, and I'll put some information up on the episode. You might have already heard something on the intro. But here we've got someone who is a CMRP. You know, we love CMRPs on CMMS Radio because they get it. He's also a CRL. He's got over 2 decades of dedicated experience in maintenance and reliability. Now, this is why I say things like bona fide experts, people that have been there, done the work, made improvements at plants, at mines, at facilities operations, anything that's asset-centric where you really need to incorporate the realities of reliability, if I can say such a term. And he's going to be presenting a learning session at Reliable Plant 2024 in Chicago. We're going to get to that. But first, I want to welcome you to CMMS Radio, Adrian Messer of SDT Ultrasound. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Greg. Really appreciate the introduction. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I know we've been working on this for a while. We met briefly in person last year. That was at Reliable Plant in Orlando. And before we get into what you're going to do at Reliable Plant in Chicago this year, I wanted to just ask, how did you get into this space? How did this journey really start? Was it family influences, anything like that? Like, take us back and then bring us up to today.
Yeah, wow. Yes, so it doesn't seem like I've been in the industry for 21 years now. It doesn't feel like it's been that long, and I don't feel like I'm as old as I'm 48, but a couple of years ago, it hit me that, when I go into a room, I'm no longer one of the younger people in the room. So it kind of hit me a couple of years ago. That's just a fact of life. But so, my dad was a welder. So growing up, he was a welder at a nuclear power plant. So I always thought that was really cool. And, just kind of, I won't say that I followed in those footsteps, but I went to Clemson University. I'm a 2001 graduate at Clemson. I actually majored in business and didn't have intentions of getting into, the industrial kind of manufacturing space. I just kind of fell into it, and thankful that I did. I mean, it's an industry where I have really cut my teeth and really built a career for myself, and it's a beautiful industry. I mean, there's so many people in our industry that are willing to share their knowledge and their time and their expertise. And I look back in those 21 years, and I can think of several key individuals that really kind of instilled in me some kind of key ideas that I've kind of taken and ran with and made my own. And I want to be one of those individuals that people can reflect on and say, hey, Adrian Messer took the time one day and shared some knowledge and expertise. And it's all about passing that on. So that's the beautiful thing about our industry.
I think the thing I call it out a lot if we're talking about it on the various episodes, where specifically when we talk about maintenance and reliability, and part of that credential when we talk about a certified maintenance and reliability professional is this idea of being a net contributor, where and I'm not a CMRP, not yet anyway, where we in the maintenance space overall we need that. We need mentorship. We need guidance. We need guidance that's accurate, real, actionable, practical. And I think we know a lot of the same people in common, especially at this point now that I've been doing this a couple of years, where that really seems to be the case, where you start these conversations, whether you're at a conference, on a podcast, or whatever it might be, and people in the maintenance space want to go there. They want to go there right now and really talk real about it, talk about what really is working. And one of the best things, or their favorite things to talk about, in my experience so far, is the stuff that's not working.
Yeah.
And kind of saying, you know, hey, this right here, people are misunderstanding it. This right here is something we need to demystify. And I wanted to ask you then, when it comes to where you're at on this journey, what you've seen, and you know, I talk a lot about CMMS, which for anyone that doesn't know is computerized maintenance management software. And what I'm really after is the maintenance management in the middle, aside from the software and all those great things.
Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest barrier to CMMS deployment success, or maybe even what is the most common cause of CMMS failures?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, and it's amazing to me because I'm more in the product solution, SDT ultrasound. So if we think about a CMMS, you know, it's basically an intake of data. So for us, we're a piece of data that people can put into their CMMS to generate alarms, so it can let them know based off the ultrasound data, hey, we've got a point that's in alarm. Now we can automatically generate a work order. You know, so we're a piece of data when it comes to a CMMS. But it's amazing to me at the number of companies that are in transition, moving from one CMMS to another CMMS. I mean, it seems like it's just a revolving door for a lot of these companies. There's always people in transition moving to a new CMMS. And I think one of the failures is, you know, it's a huge undertaking. I've never been involved in transition from one CMMS to another. I can only relate to what people have told me who are experiencing that. But it seems to me like there's a huge investment up front in the software, in the data, the walk downs, making sure we get all the data in there correctly. By the time all that's run out, it seems like the final piece that's either missing or, hey, we've ran out of money is training. So training on the new CMMS, making sure that every hand that's going to touch it understands how it works and what it can do. So I feel like the training and implementation, actual implementation and rollout, is probably an area that tends to get overlooked, but yet it's probably one of the most important pieces.
It's now you're definitely right there. That's spot on observation, things you've heard, seen, etc. And what it really tends to show us is that if there's anything wrong with the culture, the maintenance culture, the basic fundamentals within that particular organization, and certainly no fault to them, it's just something they have to keep working on. But that's where it starts to kind of fall down. And then you mentioned how rigorous, how involved it is to do these setups. So let's skip selecting and finding, but now we're implementing, and then we do all that work, and it starts to fall down if there is poor user adoption. You're going to get turnover. People that were involved in the original project are going to, you know, leave. They've moved on to different careers. Maybe they've retired, or maybe they've leveled up in the organization, but they're no longer going to have any involvement in driving the success of that project. So there's a lot of other areas as well that come to bear. And I think what I was getting at, the culture, like when it comes to the frontline workforce and the people that are really going to use it and touch it, as you said, if that's not in place, then you, whether it's CMMS or ultrasound technology or learning good, real fundamental best practices in lubrication, any of those would tend to fail if the culture isn't all about that, if I can say it that way. Maybe not the most professional term, but, you know, people that get it and have been able to say, yes, now I understand why you've made that make sense to me. Now I'm going to do it. Is that kind of where a lot of these things kind of fall apart is at the cultural level or the connection to the business?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, culture change is, change management. And I think a lot of times, if the new integration or the new technology, the new CMMS, if it's not done correctly, people feel left out. People don't want to feel lost. They don't want to feel like everything's in chaos. So there's different approaches when it comes to change management. I'm certainly not a change management professional, but I know there are various models out there that you can follow that, to make sure that the change that's being implemented is done successfully. But yeah, you're right. And then you add to that, and you mentioned something about the turnover. I think the industry average is 3.7 years that somebody is going to be in their job, and then they're moving on. So you add to that, so the same person that started the change may not necessarily be the person that is around once it's implemented. So that just adds another layer of difficulty, if you will.
Oh yeah, that's another one I like. I talk about it a little bit on the podcast, a heck of a lot more when I'm not on the podcast, where people parachute in because people have left, and then, well, I like this solution. I don't understand anything about that solution, and I've even heard a lot of stories where teams are like, "Wait, what are you doing? We're doing really, really well on this," and it's somebody that came in leadership that's like not a fan or whatever it might be. So I hope that people would take a better, maybe what I think is a better approach to assess what's happening now and get plugged into what the team is doing right now before you start unpacking boxes and rearranging stuff. But now I want to switch to that learning session that you're going to be doing. And what fascinates me about all the things you can see at Reliable Plant, and yes, for anybody that's listening or watching, I want you to go to Reliable Plant because my experience was really great because the maintenance mindset is kind of ever present amongst everyone. The openness to not just networking but productive networking, where we're actually trying to do some stuff. It was really, really an ever present thing for me when I went. It was a great experience. So when it comes to your presentation, this learning session that you're going to do, I wanted to get like a sneak peek into what it is, why it is, but without you having to really spoil anything. So could you talk to us a little bit about what the presentation is? What's it called? By the way, for anybody that's going to be there, that's going to be on June 3rd, and it starts at 3:30 p.m. I don't have my glasses on, so I couldn't read that.
It sounds right. Either way, it'll be that week. But yeah, so I mentioned, with SDT Ultrasound Solutions, so we're one of the recognized thought leaders and innovators in ultrasound technology. So when people think of ultrasound technology, they used to think of it as simply a leak detector. And that still is by far one of the most widely used applications for our instrumentation is compressed air and compressed gas leak detection. But really, what has become one of our core applications and where a lot of our conversations are centered around is with bearing lubrication. And so that's what I'm going to be presenting on at Reliable Plant is how to use ultrasound for bearing lubrication. So if you look at any study, there's a SKF study that's referenced frequently. There was one by the late Heinz Block in his Pump User's Handbook. He makes reference to why bearings fail. And if you look at any of those studies on why bearings fail prematurely, the majority of those reasons are lubrication related, whether it be over lubrication, under lubrication, using the wrong grease for the wrong application, or simply lubricant contamination. Those are the main reasons why bearings fail early. For us, we see a lot of failures due to over and under lubrication. So typically people will lubricate their bearings based off of timed intervals. So they go out just because they have a PM that says, apply this many pumps of grease on this date. That's what they go out and do. And that's okay, but typically the tendency for time-based lubrication alone is too much too often. So you can add in ultrasound, which is going to be based off of friction. So when you have a bearing that needs grease, there's going to be an increase in friction, therefore an increase in noise. So that's one of the sources of high frequency sound that we detect with our instruments. So if we go out and we're listening to the bearing while we're applying grease to it, that bearing again is making noise. So we measure that in a decibel level. And then we're going to add grease slowly until that friction level comes back down to a more normal or baseline level, and then we stop adding grease. So it's a more precise way to lubricate bearings, and it really helps to take the guesswork out of, am I applying too much grease or not enough grease? So we call it precision lubrication or ultrasound assisted lubrication, but either way we're hoping to ultimately prevent lubrication related failures in those bearings because we're now measuring the associated friction or noise levels.
Question, actually two questions that I'm popped into my head here. One, does when we say bearings, this would be bearings of all various types, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Rolling
And
elements, any kind of bearing. Yep. Except for shielded or sealed. Obviously, we're not gonna lubricate a sealed bearing, so that's a whole other conversation. But yes, but most 90% of bearings, yes, we can do ultrasound assisted lubrication.
okay, and then when it comes to not just utilizing this technology but reaching that goal of being able to do better, say for example, I'm going to call it, I'm taking a shot here, like real-time lubrication while the bearing is in use,
Yes.
to utilize this technology. Is this something that organizations that aren't doing any of this yet can jump into, or is this more likely something for a little bit more mature maintenance operation to incorporate?
Yeah, that is a great question. And we see it on both ends of the spectrum. We see where a lot of people will actually start with, we have a kind of an entry level mechanic friendly device that, again, we can put that in the hands of the lubricator or the mechanic and they can go out and use it. And a lot of times they're looking for ways that can help them do their job more effectively, efficiently, and better. So they're very accepting to this device, but it's an entry level device that you could use in conjunction with that time based PM. So again, let's say the lubricator has this PM that says 8 pumps of grease for this bearing. So they take their, we call it a lube checker. They take their lube checker. They're listening. They're watching that decibel level. And let's say after 4 pumps of grease, the decibel level falls. Well, there's no reason to put 4 more pumps of grease into that bearing. So that's where we start to see people adjusting their time-based procedures based off what ultrasound tells them. And then for the more advanced types of programs where maybe they already have an established vibration analysis where they're running routes, collecting data, maybe they've even got wireless sensors installed where they're collecting data. We do have a more advanced system that will allow them to do route-based data collection to where now we're trending, we're setting baselines, we're setting alarm levels. So there's options for people who are just starting out as well as people who are in more mature types of asset condition management programs.
Yeah, and this, like for me, taking in all this information, and I'm just imagining all these things. Somebody on a plant floor, somebody that's on a much larger piece of equipment that might not be in an internal plant, but maybe it's external.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this is something that if people can incorporate, especially that part you're talking about with the preventive maintenance, because one of the things that happens in maintenance management, whether you're using a CMMS platform or something similar to manage these things, the various time intervals that we're all kind of familiar with. I mean, they become kind of buzzwords, and you might get OEM spec on, here's your frequency intervals or time based intervals or mileage based, any of these types of things. And all of that kind of changes when we get into the different environments. And how is this asset where these bearings are critical to its ongoing operation and even more efficient operation, they really are connected to that. How is the environment, the way it's being used, what it's being used for, by whom, who maintains it, all those is going to change that. And we would love, and I say we as a general community, if we can do the right PMs on the right frequency based on more of this information, not just time intervals, but with condition being a consideration. And we'd love for that to become a leading indicator instead of what is more common, the trailing indicator that actually it has already failed by the time you know something's wrong. And I like preventive maintenance is phenomenal. It's a great way to drive value. Your assets themselves need to be cared for. They're not going to care for themselves, but how do we get that right? So this is all really useful, and it's not so much as innovative as it is. It's more about how do we take a best practice and make it even better. Is that a fair statement of what this
That's,
really
yeah, I think
comes
that's
down to?
I think that sums it up pretty well. And yeah, a couple of points to some things that you said. You talked about the OEM specs, and that's a good place to start. You can base it off of I'm talking about the amount of grease and the type of grease. The OEM spec, that's a good place to start, but it shouldn't be your only factor to consider when we think about putting together a preventive maintenance program for a motor out in our plant or facility. But there you can calculate out how much grease to put based off the bearing size, type, and dimensions. That's kind of another step that you can take. And then you add in ultrasound, and that really not only does it give you an indicator of, hey, am I adding enough grease or have I started to apply too much grease, but it also gives you an indicator to the overall health of the bearing. So a bearing that is in some sort of failure mode is going to sound a lot different than a bearing that just is in need of lubrication. So if we go out with just a grease gun, that doesn't give us any other indicator than, hey, we're putting in grease to this bearing. You add in ultrasound, and now we're taking it a step further where we're going to know when we've applied the correct amount of grease, and we're going to know if there's other problems wrong with the bearing.
It's so for me, a lot of times I bring it all the way back to cars, vehicles, automobiles, trucks, heavy equipment like that.
Yeah.
And I tend to oversimplify the realities behind this, because my general understanding when we talk about lubrication and lubrication analysis in and of itself, I mean, I think there's a lot to it. There's a lot of things that are happening in there, swimming around, if you will, in the oil and the lubrication
Yeah.
to give us this information. But you have to learn about it. You can't just willy-nilly apply it, kind of like what you're talking about, where we over lubricate something. And I just keep thinking back to when I was younger, maybe in high school and in shop class, or you're out and about and you think about the different bearings that are on that vehicle, whether it's the motor or other parts of the vehicle, right? It could be in the rear end. And if you say, for example, overpack a differential, the rear differential, you are going to potentially damage the rear differential,
Yeah.
and B, you are going to somehow negatively impact the performance of that differential. And if you're into something like, let's say, drag racing, not just going to and from work,
Yep.
you have to get that right. And back then they didn't have the technologies, for that. It advanced in the subsequent years, because I was like, I'm talking like 80s, right?
Yeah.
uh Mid to late 80s. I ain't that old yet, but I'm getting there. So I think these concepts transfer into the world of manufacturing in an even more critical way, but it's not different. What I mean is, a car running down a quarter mile is one thing, and it's attached to a lot of outcomes. But when we talk about our manufacturing, our plants, mining, and all this other stuff, it's connected to how the world keeps moving and keeps turning, right? So I love learning about this stuff, and I don't want to give away too much more about the presentation, because I want people to come to Reliable Plant. I want them to learn about it. Real quick, I want to give a shout out about the Reliable Plant Conference for anybody out there that's listening. Once we drop this episode or looking, I'll put some stuff on screen. Uh, you can get a discount if you go to conference.reliableplant.com, and when you are registering to attend conference, you can put in the code CMMS, just those 4 letters, and you will get a 10% discount. It helps get people to the conference. And the reason I want to help people with that is it's good to bring multiple attendees from your organization. If you want to go to Adrian's presentation and learning session, it's, one or two of you could go to that, but one of you could go to that one, and there might be another one going on down the hall or on the other side of the conference where you can get more and more learning to bring back. So just shouting that out, it helps everybody. If you can get that discount, get you there. So I want to move to the fun segment of what I do on CMMS Radio, at least for the first time somebody's on. You ready for some fun questions, Adrian?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. And these are pretty straight up. They're fun, way to get to know you. First one, what is your favorite music?
Oh, wow. I love just about any kind of music, but what I find myself listening to most often is probably classic rock, Southern rock. So Allman Brothers, Leonard Skinner, that's kind of my go-to. So anything along that genre or country, I like country, but depends on the mood, depends on if I'm on the boat or at the house, or depends on what I'm doing.
Oh yeah, environment definitely plays a role, not just in your asset and equipment management, but also in your consumption of music, and music transcends everything. So
Right.
there's no wrong answers to any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Next fun question is, what is your favorite sport or hobby? And if it's a sport, it does not have to be one that you play. It could be one that you like to watch, support, and kind of follow.
Okay, yeah, that's an easy one. So I mentioned Clemson earlier, so I'm a huge college football fan. We recently had a really nice run with men's basketball. So we made it to the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight, which we had only done once before. In 1980, so had a really nice run. But yeah, college football. I actually just live 20 minutes from Clemson, so I'm fortunate enough to go to a lot of games and any sporting events. So yeah, Clemson Tigers, go Tigers.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And then final of the fun questions. Now on this one, there really are no wrong answers. So I'd like to get your thoughts, perspective, or philosophy on work-life balance.
Wow, yeah. So that's a big one. There definitely is a balance. I'm a family man, so I've got a 12-year-old daughter, so I understand how important it is to balance work life and home life. Um, but it's really all about time management. I'll go back to time management. So when I'm not traveling, I work from home. So it's being able to start work when I need to, and then end when I need to, and then having the will and the space to kind of close off the work life and transition into home life. So I guess I'm a little unique in that, hey, I don't report to a plan every day, but in a sense I do. I'm reporting to the customers that we serve, and being reactive to their needs. But yeah, definitely is a balance of time. So I would really default back to just managing time, prioritizing your day, and getting done what I need to keep our customers happy.
It's good stuff. And the reason I say there's no wrong answers is it's so highly individual, and it's also circumstantial, and there's so many approaches. So I think it's fun to kind of explore that, get people's perspective or philosophy, because someone out there is going to say, yeah, I deal with that. Or, oh yeah, I remember that. Whatever. It might help, right? And I don't mean whatever in a bad way. It's like we want to have a little bit of fun here. We're all out here working. We all have families, and we hear all kinds of answers to this. So it's always good stuff. So just for everyone out there, if you want to get in touch with Adrian, you can find him on LinkedIn. That's the best way to get in touch with him. And I'll put some information up on the episode, but it's easy to find him on LinkedIn. I stay connected with him there. Adrian, I want to thank you for being on with me, man. This was really fun to have this conversation.
Yeah, it's been awesome, Greg. I really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you in Chicago at Reliable Plant in really just a few weeks.
Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit CMMSradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS, from selection to implementation, to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.